Good morning, church.
Good morning.
So glad that everyone is here. So glad that we have an opportunity to spend time in God's Word. I love it that our young people, even Joe, are memorizing and reading for us from the Word of God. And we've seen some of that in what's going on. As a reminder, I do want, if you've seen your bulletin, it said that Josiah and I were going to be preaching together today. We've actually put that off 1 week. The elders are going to be sending a letter out to the congregation this week about our services next week. The one reminder that I would have is that we do have an attended nursery for anyone that wants to take advantage of that, for our infants up to age 3 years old. We have an attended nursery that is here and in room 22 and is available for that. Next week, we're going to have a topic that is going to be on the more sensitive side. And it's going to be something that we're going to want to address as a family together. And like I said, our elders are going to be sending a letter out to the congregation about that and some things that are going to be a little bit different about next week's service as we go. Let's start this morning this way. Tim McGraw had a hit song written by Lori McKenna, and it was called Humble and Kind. And it was a series of admonitions in a song, and those that have heard it will understand what I mean by this. If you haven't heard it, it's a series of do this, or don't do this. And if we don't watch out, I believe that reading through the Sermon on the Mount can be interpreted that same way. To a list of do's and don'ts, when it is so much more for us to understand. When our kids are little, they need do's and don'ts. They need a list of them. More don'ts than do, many times. But mainly that's what it's about. We say, don't do this and do that, and don't do this. And we expect them at some time in their life not to need that list any longer. But to let it be an instinct for them to actually do the right thing when it comes about. Because it's so much more than just doing. What we're talking about, it's about being. The Sermon on the Mount shouldn't be taken as a list of minimums. A list of minimums of what can I do to just squeak in. And I believe so much that would actually rob it of its purpose. Now, Jesus here is describing kingdom people. New instincts, new ways of living. No more just being a decent human being, but a kingdom person. So he starts, and he has a way of dealing with us in this that he points out that there are oaths that we take. The passage right before the passage that Joe read, starting verse 33, tells us about those oaths. And Jews, specifically in this time, throughout their history, they took oaths very, very seriously. And Jesus would have known that. They took the name of God very seriously. If we read in Leviticus, the 19th chapter, we see one of the many passages that says, do not swear falsely by my name, and so profane the name of your God. I am the Lord. Leviticus constantly wants us to remember, we do what we do, and we don't do the things that we don't do, because he is Lord, and that changes who we are. Quite a few distinguishing marks of our own judicial system actually came from the Jews. Did you know that on the Supreme Court, there's been a lot of news about the Supreme Court lately, but did you know that actually above the steps of the Supreme Court, that statue there, do you know who that is?
No.
That's Moses.
Huh.
And what is he handing? What does he have in his arms? The law. The 10 Commandments. You guys are chill, just think about it. Quite a few of the distinguishing marks of our judicial system actually came from the Jews. And as far as we can tell, that's where the actual judicial system got its genesis. Another word that comes from the Jews. Moses being carved on the front of the Supreme Court building in Washington, D.C. is just one of those things. Jury trials, a call to speak only truth. Formal oaths before being led into court or by being disposed. Rules against bearing false witness. Very important. And the penalties that go with that for the same. Fairness in hearing both sides. All of these things were given to us by the Jews. But back to these oaths. They took them very, very seriously. Jews hallowed the name of God so much that they often, but not always, refused to even say it. On a side note for that, whenever I say that Jews did this and Jews did that, please understand that not all Jewish societies were this way or that, behaved the same way. So I'm going to paint a little bit in a broad picture when I say that. Some of them would use the word of God. And we've seen that. We've seen that where it's been written out without vowels. Because in our language, if you don't have a vowel, it's not a word, right? Right. So we say, what's the word? Yahweh. We don't know how, J-H-W-H. We don't know how that is pronounced, but that's the purpose behind it. That was giving the reverence. That was giving the awe due God, because his name was so high, his name was so mighty, that we can't even utter it from our lips. In Europe and all through the medieval times, blasphemy was to use the name of God inappropriately. Interesting for us today. So anybody back then on Facebook, or ye old Facebook, that would have gone OMG. Pet peeve of mine? That's blasphemous. That's taking God's name in a context that it was not meant to be taken. And that was called blasphemy because it is not using God's name properly. If you didn't use his name in reference, they said don't use the name at all. And they were serious about that, and Jesus reminds us of that and what was said in the passage in Deuteronomy, chapter 23, verses 21 through 23. It says, if you make a vow to the Lord your God, do not be slow to pay it, for the Lord your God will certainly demand it of you, and you will be guilty of sin. But if you refrain from making a vow, you will not be guilty. Whenever your lips utter, you must be sure to do, because you have made your vow freely to the Lord your God with your own mouth. That sounds pretty serious, doesn't it? It sounds pretty serious because it is serious. I would say deadly serious. And some Jews took this literally and so personally that they refused to take oaths at all. Others would say that they would use more scalable words. And he gives us some of those in Matthew 5 here, where it said, don't swear by heaven or earth or by Jerusalem or by your head. And those were getting closer, but they weren't using the actual name of God. But God, through Jesus, in the Sermon on the Mount here, calls you and me to a higher standard of speech. When we're going to say something, we're going to do it. We're going to take that seriously in our word, becoming our oath. Whenever we make an oath, we must keep that oath. Say what you mean. Don't say what you do not mean. And that's another thing. We often call this being polite. there's also the call to be noticed and important, and important as to be seen as important. Therefore, we tend to rush in many times and fill the silences. Brothers and sisters, we don't need to speak unless we need to speak. Are you with me? I love the old saying, it is better to remain silent and be thought of as a fool than to open your mouth and remove all doubt. How many times I have been guilty of that. If you have something to say, you feel a need to rush in and fill the silence, that awkwardness. But we don't. Having something to say, kind of like what Paul said, maybe sometimes on the better side of this, woe be it unto me if I cannot preach the gospel of Christ. I feel like Paul would have exploded if he did not have the chance to talk about Jesus. Say what you mean, but you don't need to say any more than that. You don't need to add to it. Jesus looks here and he's saying, don't take oath. He's not saying here, don't take oaths at all. But there were some oaths that the Jewish people made and that we make that are not covered by this, I believe. This seems to be very much a judicial oath, something that we'd be talking about there, that we're allowing ourselves to shade the meeting. For example, I'll give you this one. Someone walks up to you and says, okay, to tell you the truth. Because otherwise I would lie to you. When people say, you know what, to tell you the truth, it makes me think. Does it not you? Now, I think we need to be careful about that in our language, because in British society, if someone wanted to reveal something about themselves to you, they would start by saying, well, to be honest, which was a totally different thing, because they are actually setting up something that they are going to reveal about themselves. Someone says that in America, well, to be honest, well, that's a trick. That would be a good thing. Like, I never actually listened to Tim McGraw sing the song, to be honest. There you are. That's a self-revelatory thing. And they use that expression a lot in England. But in America, when we hear someone say, well, to tell you the truth, it means something totally different to us. And the more people use that, I hear it a lot at car dealerships. Just saying. We know what's coming when people say that. But are we people who speak what we mean? I think about this, and there's people among us in this very room that deal with this on a daily basis. Brian's not here today. John Achenbach is not here today. But if you would ask them, they get lied to every single day. Those in law enforcement. I had a conversation with one of our officers here last week. All the time. Medical professionals. Bev, do you ever get lied to? All the time. All the time. Okay, so I got a perfect example. A few years ago, I had an injury that required surgery. After the surgery, it required some rehabilitation on that. So I would go to the physical terrorist. Yes, exactly. I would walk in, say, I'm here. Is this sadist or us? They would all laugh. And then they would ask me the questions. Have you done your exercises today? Okay. Why? Why would you try to get someone to lie? Yes, actually, I did a couple. I got bored, had a snack. Doctors will look and say, do you have a list of your medication? We tend to leave some of the stuff off. the stuff I got at the health food store and maybe on the internet or at the Herbalife store. We leave those things off and we don't tell him. Or he'll say, have you been exercising? Yeah? Yeah? Let me see. Jumping to conclusions. Dodging responsibility. Yeah, sure. Why not? I have been. They get lied to all the time. Wouldn't it be better if we just told them the truth and says, no, I've been taking this junk. I haven't exercised. I'd like to go out for a smoke right now, but you won't let me do that either. People, we need to be the people that just go ahead and tell the truth. We don't need to have parsing words. And this hits close to home to me. Doesn't it get old on the television, watching the news, one side trying to catch up with the other side and this and that because of something that was said? Look what James says in chapter 5 and verse 12. It says, above all, my brothers and sisters, do not swear, not by heaven, nor earth, nor by anything. All you need to say is a simple yes or no. Otherwise, you will be condemned. Doesn't that sound very much like what James' brother Jesus said in his first sermon here on the Sermon on the Mount? I think often of promises that I've made to my children over the years. And of course, one of my children, who will be nameless, was very, very smart. All three of my kids, our kids were very, very smart, but one of them had a simple way about himself where he could interject new things. And so I'd say, we're going to go to Disneyland on Saturday. And this child would say, do you promise? I'm thinking, I can't say that. We don't know what's going to happen. I stopped myself before I said, I may get in a car accident and die before that. Not very comforting to a 12-year-old. But I said, yes, I do promise that if everything goes the way that we plan now, we are going to be able to do that. And I believe there's room for disagreement here even among God's people. But I believe this is one of those times that we really need to think before we speak, to take very seriously our oaths. When we talk about the legal, judicial oaths, we make oaths all the time, though, don't we? We make oaths in marriage to each other and to God and to those that are around us. We make oaths in baptism when we put on Christ and we surrender our lives to Him and give of ourselves to Him. We make agreements. I have a mortgage that I have made a promise to sign. We sign papers all the time, and the legal ramifications of not following through on honoring a signed document. We might sign pledge cards over time. Here at Chesmont, our elders are putting together a fundraising for us, and we're going to pledge so much dollars over the next amount of months or days or years. Those are fine. But I don't think that's what Jesus is talking about here. Oaths, judicial oaths, are required for a people who are not habitually honest. And therefore, we run everybody through these things. I have taken an oath twice, formally, in my life. I don't like the word swear. And to be really upfront about that word for you, I should say, to be honest with you, I don't like that word. And Jesus didn't like that word either, because that's what He was getting at and telling us here. But when I stood up before the colonel and I raised my hand and I said, I do solemnly swear that I will support and defend the Constitution of the United States of America against all enemies, foreign and domestic. Just a side note, do you know the oath that our soldiers and our sailors and our airmen take is more strenuous than the President of the United States takes? It calls for more action. It calls for more duty. And it calls for more responsibility. Just saying. The second legal oath that I took was when I adopted Carrie's two boys. What a great day that was. Now, I know that you can go to the court now and say, well, if you don't want to say swear, they'll say affirm. Well, doesn't it mean the same thing? It really does. Maybe we try this. We get into court, we get into a situation where we're being called to this. Maybe we don't answer that. Maybe we don't answer that, and maybe instead we say, you know what, I'm a Christian. I'm a Christian, and I am aware of the laws of perjury. I am also aware of what it means to break those rules through this. I'm a Christian. If you ask me a question, I will tell you the truth. I do believe that this is something, though, that we do want to stress, we do want to remember and remind ourselves on a regular basis. Oaths that we make amongst ourselves in marriage and baptism, these oaths, or maybe we call them covenants. Perhaps we call those covenants because God holds us to those covenants. Very, very strictly, I might say. One of my favorite analogies of this very thing is when the Gibeonites came around the corner and they had doctored their clothes and they had doctored the food that was in their bags. And they said, we have come from a faraway place and we want to make an oath with you. We want to make a covenant with you. And God said, no, don't make covenants. There's a number of mistakes the Israelites made here. One, they didn't consult God. If you go back and you read the scriptures, every single time that the Jews messed up, there was one area that was missing. Every single time. We look at with David, we look at with Saul, we look at with all of the stories that we have. They didn't consult God. And they got to this point. But this is one of those things in which that happened. God said, don't make that oath. But they did. They made it on the basis of a lie. But God held them to the oath. And it cost them. It cost them dearly. You want to look up another one? Look about making an oath to God about sacrificing the first thing that's going to come out of your house when you come back from battle. That will make you think twice. You've made an oath. Keep the oath. And be careful the oath that you make. But let's move on to our next point because I don't think many of us are going to have to go before a judge. Well, maybe Josiah. Josiah, remember this. We need to watch out about multiplying words. Are you with me? Many of us in America remember a time where the nightly news was about 15 to 30 minutes. Except for the special occasions where there was a news bulletin or something serious going on. Then the news was like an hour long. And it was like death for all of us kids in the room because we had no thing to watch that was interesting for an entire hour. Now, news is like 24/7. And it's not just on one station. It's on like 372,000. And they have to fill those channels and those shows with words. And they multiply those words. Jesus says, when you have to fill something with words, the devil will be there. And he's absolutely correct. We think of sports. I remember growing up and there was the game of the week. One game. And you know what? It was never my team. So I had to watch someone else's team. Now, you can actually get it on your phone. And you can have an app and buy a program where you can see every single game. One person says, you can watch actual live scoring plays of football from about 12:15 until almost 11:30 at night every Sunday. And then you've got Monday night, and you've got Thursday night, and now you've got the playoffs here, and this is starting. It's all over the place. And then there's shows that talk about it. There's shows that talk about it. And it becomes one long, revolving and rolling argument. But God says, watch out. Don't fill our plates with words. Let your yes be yes. Let your no be no. Anything else opens the door for the devil. If you're having a hard time understanding, let me do this one. Pretty simple scenario here. This is not true. I've made it completely up. But let's pretend that I hate broccoli. And it is well known that I hate broccoli. This is completely made up. I love broccoli. But for some reason, Carrie, or for reasons known only to her, wants me to live a little bit longer, so she's going to fix healthy things for me. She makes broccoli and puts it on the plate. And as I'm eating it, she asks the question, how do you like the food? Thank you. And if I stop there, things are great. But sometimes we don't stop. We go a little bit further. You know I don't like broccoli. Why would you make it for me? You made me broccoli. You're turning into your mother. What? What? What have I done? I have gone to a very dark place. I can picture myself in a tunnel with my relatives behind me saying, "Wrong!" But this is what God is saying. Saying, just let your yes be yes and your no be no. And that's all we need to say. And we come back to this thing, but you have heard it said. But I tell you, in verse 38, what Joe read for us, you have heard it said, an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. But I tell you, do not resist an evil person. If someone strikes you on the right cheek, turn to him the other also. And if someone wants to sue you for your tunic, give him your coat as well. If someone forces you to go a mile, go with him 2 miles. Give to the one who asks you, and do not turn away from the one who wants to borrow from you. Whoa. Did Jesus just get impractical there, or what? Remember, I told you at the beginning of our lessons here, I believe I heard it in Scott McKnight's book, but reading through the Sermon on the Mount, you have to notice the places where you go and you stop nodding. This is one of those places for me, folks. This is one of those places where I've had a hard time nodding sometimes because I think of the exceptions, as if Jesus wouldn't have thought of the exceptions. I do. What is he trying to say here? You know, early on in our history, in our camp, our family in the Churches of Christ, which is a bit interesting, but early on in our history, there was a very good mix of pacifists versus non-pacifists in the church. We remember that there are many varieties of pacifism, and there's many varieties of non-pacifists, but during and through the Civil War, all of that changed. Maybe the fact of seeing brother against brother, father against son, or vice versa, maybe that made that way. So there's a huge shift from non-pacifism to a pacifist situation. And then World War I came about, and the rules changed a little bit, and a lot from our camp decided that they were going to go into service projects in lieu of being in a fighting nature. The president at the time, Woodrow Wilson, did not like that, and he was putting those people in jail. Those that were conscientious objectors were not being allowed to object. And then by the time World War II came and everything with that, the pendulum had swung all the way back the other way. Others served as non-combatants, but that was not something that was allowed in World War I, was now being allowed in World War II because there was much more that were fighting. Anytime now, it's almost, over my lifetime, it was almost, up till the last few years at least, it was hard to find a pacifist in the church. Because there were so many that were of the mindset that we're going to do that. But brothers and sisters, that's changing. You know, most of our young people coming out of even Bible colleges today classify themselves as pacifists. Today, from what I see and hear, again, an anecdote of data, I'm just saying that from what I see, pacifism is very much on the rise, especially in our younger people and in our young ministers. Most of them, and I have a lot of friends that are in this boat, and I respect them very much. I respect them to the point where I've even told them, I don't think I'm a strong enough person to do what you do, and to be able to have that opinion. We remember what he's talking about here, where he starts and says, you have heard it said, but Jesus said, as he comes out, he quotes God through the law, through Moses' law. And then he just shoves it out a little bit further. You've heard it said, but I say. Instead of don't murder, don't even hate people or call people fools. What Josiah and I are going to talk about next week. Instead of committing adultery, don't even look at people that way anymore. Don't plan for it. Don't even think about it. And he shoves it back out. And it goes further. Well, the law for an eye is actually a Jewish law. Sounds pretty cruel, doesn't it? It can be incredibly enlightening when we see our history. Because in other societies, this very topic, an eye for an eye or tooth for tooth, was not there. It had to do with your social standing. Good point. I mean, if you throw a rock and break my window, I can't come over and kill you. But in some societies, it all depended on the social standing. If I had a higher level of social standing, then I could reap a higher level of revenge on someone for a lighter offense of what they had done to me. Among the Jews, there was equality, unlike was found in many other places. Laws that say you cannot hurt more than you've been hurt. And there is an echo of that in our own American law of self-defense. If someone kicks you and knocks you to the ground, you can't shoot them. You just can't do it. But the point being, that is an echo of what Jewish law consists of. We look at Jewish law, and we're going to look at passages from Exodus and also passages from Leviticus that say, but if there's serious injury, you take life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, foot for foot, burn for burn, wound for wound, bruise for bruise. Then Leviticus comes in, and Leviticus says, anyone who enters their neighbor to be injured in the same manner. You see, again, not going overboard. We're not wiping out the entire family. Fracture for fracture, eye for eye, tooth for tooth. The one who has inflicted the injury must suffer the same injury. Again, maybe it sounds cruel, but it's amazingly just and fair, and it echoes what we've seen in our own time. Now, retribution was not optional. Retribution was required. It was enforced by the community, and it was in a culturally acceptable way of handling wrongs that were done to each other. In Deuteronomy 19 and 21, it says, show no pity. The scriptures say, life for life, eye for eye, tooth for tooth, hand for hand, and foot for foot. Jesus gets up. Is he saying we need to live a life of pacifism? I don't think so. Again, like I said, I have many friends that are pacifists, and we have these conversations. I respect them for that. But we have more time when we discuss the Christian as if when we can actually sit down and look at this. Can a Christian serve in the military today? Can a Christian do these things? We're going to differ on those opinions. I am honored that I was given the right and the life to serve my country. And it's one of the greatest honors that I have ever experienced. To be able to uphold what is our way of life. And what is our way of worshiping God. And I thank God for that. There was an expression among the Jews, from what I understand, about being insulted or lied to or slapped. I don't know if that's what he's referring to, or he's saying something about this oath or something against them. It could be a physical blow, but regardless, Jesus, through this passage, is releasing us from the obligation to respond. We don't have to respond, folks. Somebody goes for us, we don't have to go back. If someone yells at us, we don't have to yell back. If injustice is done to us, we don't have to go and get our pound of flesh. Jesus, through this lesson, is releasing us from the burden of needing justice. And brothers and sisters, I struggle with this. And I fight this every day in my life, continually asking the Holy Spirit to help work with me on that. What is it like to walk around and always feel like the world has wronged us and that we need to get ours in exchange for what's been done to us? It's just a burden. It's a burden to carry. So if someone says something against me, I need to remember Jesus says I don't have to respond back. I don't have to speak back. I don't have to defend myself. Why? Because Jesus released me from needing to respond. I can refer to the great theologian Elsa. Let it go. You see, country music, animation, I'm a very well-rounded preacher. Simply put, brothers and sisters, Jesus is calling us to love one another and lay aside some of our rights for Him. Some of our rights need to be laid aside so that we can live at peace with one another. The world will never get this. The world wants power over each other. The world wants dominance. The world wants justice. The world wants status. The world wants fairness. But when in history of the universe have you ever gotten the idea that fairness actually works here? That fairness rules? Instead of responding that way, I would never go to God and say, Lord, give me what's coming to me. No. Not at all. I don't even want what's coming to you, much less what's coming to me. I want grace. I want mercy. And if we want grace and mercy and peace for ourselves, we're going to have to want it for the people that injured us as well. When I was a kid, I don't think I was much different than other kids. I didn't share very well. I didn't want to share. I had no interest whatsoever in sharing my stuff. I wanted it. That word, mine. Mine, mine, mine. Did you have to teach your kids that word? It's amazing. Whatever language, it's one of the very first words that we learn. Mine, mine. But when I grew older, it was still mine, mine. As an adult, many times, yes, mine, mine. And it took God a long time to get this lesson to me. Saying, Lee, you can take a slap and not return it. You're free. You're free from living life looking to get even with other people. He's doing something else here, though, because he talks about giving here as well. You know, if you grasp your money, if you grasp your time, if you grasp your status, if you grasp your standing, what a miserable life that can be. What a horrible life that is. But Jesus says, just give it away. Somebody comes at you thinking, I'm going to get it. I'm going to take their coat. Well, take this as well. You're going to force someone to walk a mile, volunteer to go the next. That'll take the sting out of it. It's amazing what happens when we don't strike back. Give more than was expected. Don't worry about the future. Jesus says it over and over. And I know that's hard, is it not? Especially when every commercial out there tells us two things. One, you're not going to live long enough, so you got to take this drug. Now, the drug might kill you, but maybe you can live a little bit longer. The second thing that's going to happen is you're going to run out of money before you run out of life. We're told don't panic at those commercials. Jesus says don't. Jesus says live righteously right now. Let God take care of tomorrow. So my question is, are you still nodding? Have we stopped nodding? Or are we willing to bow the knee and live life without the need for retribution? We're going to end with the words from Paul in Romans the 12th chapter. Bless those who persecute you, and bless and do not curse. Rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. Live in harmony with one another. Do not be proud, but be willing to associate with people of low position. Do not be conceited. Do not repay anyone evil for evil. Be careful. Do what is right in the eyes of everyone. If it's possible, as far as it depends on you, live at peace with everyone. Do not take revenge, my friends, but leave room for God's wrath. For it is written, it is mine to avenge. I will repay, says the Lord. On the contrary, if your enemy is hungry, feed them. If he's thirsty, give him something to drink. In doing this, you will heap burning coals on his head. That's not another form of revenge, folks. Do not be overcome by evil, but overcome evil with good. Would you stand with me? I'm going to ask you to read this with me one more time. Romans chapter 12 and verse 21. We read together, do not be overcome with evil, but overcome evil with good. Amen, church? Amen. Let's sing. Take my life and